Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the flotsam to my jetsam, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
Today we are talking about Xenomorphs.
So, if you are unfamiliar with the term Xenomorph, they are the aliens of the Aliens franchise, originally made by Ridley Scott and birthed from the mind of H.R. Giger, who is a Swiss madman. These are the biomechanical, just horrifying creatures from the Aliens franchise. Mm-hmm. They're the ones with the really big, long heads. The idea that you would have gotten this far in life without having seen a xenomorph, even if you didn't hear them called a xenomorph, is ludicrous to me. You've seen these things. They're out there.
Oh, yeah.
Later on, they got smashed up with the Predator series, which is for Aliens versus Predator. And they made some really bad movies, but some really good video games, and then also some really bad video games.
Yeah.
So these are a staple of horror pop culture at this point.
Oh, yeah. So what did you have in mind for the Xenomorph?
Well, I want to preface all of this by saying that I absolutely adore the Xenomorph. H.R. Giger's design for them is beautiful and terrifying. And I love them, and the movie, especially those first two movies are really, really good. They're my favorite of all time. So I'm not saying that we're going to improve them, but there are some things that don't make sense. And I think that's prime material for us to go in and do some little tweaks and maybe come up with some good ideas.
Well, first off, let's go ahead and sort of list out what makes a xenomorph. What are the properties of a xenomorph, as it were?
Okay, we'll approach this from the angle of their life cycle, which I think is one of the things that is most iconic about them, but also maybe doesn't make all that much sense. When we first encounter a xenomorph in any series, they are an egg left dormant that are discovered by some essentially space truckers. And from that egg comes what everyone calls a face hugger, which is a horrifying flesh-colored spider thing that comes flying out of the egg, and it latches onto this guy's face, and it implants something into his chest, an egg, essentially.
Yeah.
And then he seems like he's fine for a few scenes, and then what turns out that what had been implanted in his chest was an embryo that was growing inside of him until it is big enough and strong enough that it bursts out from his chest and then rapidly grows to be like a 7-foot tall biomechanical black monster with this huge long head and no eyes and multiple rows of teeth. And then from that creature, at least in the extended scenes from the first movie, it's made clear that one can then create more eggs and chest bursters if it needs to. That from there could become a huge problem. In the later movies, they start expanding on the biology a little bit. They add in things like the alien queen, the idea that when these guys form a colony, there's a single entity that sort of rules over them and lays all of the eggs, and she's huge and terrifying with, I think, multiple arms and huge long tails and stuff. Very cool. But things start to get a little bit weird the further down the aliens hole that you get.
Yeah.
Oh, and then very famously, they are said to have acid for blood. So if you ever shoot one, then the acid comes out and eats through metal and stuff and kills people, which is a slightly weird biological thing.
Yeah. Another thing I want to point out about the xenomorphs, and this isn't really a complaint or anything, I always thought it was really cool, was the double mouth, I love mouth within a mouth.
That is so cool. Yeah, I mean, I could go on all day about how good that design is. I love the way it sort of blends biology with mechanics, which is an H.R. Giger staple, is to have that sort of machine mixed with flesh look to it. And an absolutely genius stroke of not giving it any eyes, that just flat face where you can see the mouth and the teeth, but it has there's no way to look into it. It feels alien. It's so good.
I thought one of the cooler things that was the original design was that front part was slightly translucent.
Oh yeah,
and you could see a human skull in the front.
Yes, it's interesting. H.R. Giger has been hugely influential to me because at some point when I was too young, I thought
your furniture looked familiar.
When I was too young to have this happen, my parents abandoned me in a library or a bookstore, and I found a book of H.R. Giger art, and I pored over it for 3 hours, and that stuff burned itself into my brain, and so to this day I'm still I still love his work. And he started on ideas that would evolve into the Xenomorph years and years earlier. Like that's it's not so much that he like came up with this idea for the movie, but that he refined something that he'd been working on for a long time. And if you want to spend a lovely afternoon, go looking for the sort of precursor art for the Xenomorphs. I will warn you, because we're a relatively family-friendly podcast, it's super sexual. H.R. Giger was the horniest person I've ever come across. He is so wrapped up on this stuff. There are genitals and boobs and all kinds of stuff all over his art.
I remember quite well. I remember doing a report on him in high school, and then going to look for more of his art. And in the high school public library, doing Google searches for that, and quickly having to close some tabs.
Yeah, maybe this ruins the magic a little bit, but the long elongated head of the Xenomorph, the first versions of it, it's a penis. Like it's very obvious. Yeah. It's got the head and everything. And honestly, I think some of that edge, especially like keeping some of that sexual nature in the Xenomorph, is kind of where its terror comes from. Like some of it's body horror, some of it is just like the horror of a predator, but there is a huge undercurrent of like sexual assault imagery within the Xenomorph, which I think we, as much as it makes me a little bit uncomfortable to do, I think we have to keep it in the creature there. Like I don't think we can get rid of some of it. It's too ingrained.
Like, I mean, everything from the face hugger to the end design is got a little bit of that ingrained in some manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a lot of it in some cases.
Yeah, it's right at the heart of the Xenomorph.
Yeah.
So I want to take an angle. Let's nibble around the edges a little bit before we start making big changes. The one that I was thinking was, I don't like that acid blood. I think it's cool in a sort of horror sense. Like if I was writing it as a screenwriter trying to come up with my script for Aliens, I think it makes it's scary. But from a biological sense, just the idea that you could have a creature that is filled with an acid so potent that it can burn through steel in seconds, but that it somehow doesn't burn through its own body.
Yeah.
That bugs me.
I mean, I get the idea of it. The main thing of that is that if in your story you want to have this unstoppable monster and it can be hurt, but suddenly hurting it makes the situation worse somehow.
Yeah.
That's a good scary element.
I think it is. And I think that the way to make it sort of, I don't know about like to make it make a little bit more sense, but not curtail its danger very much, would be just to talk about it like maybe not every extremity of it, like maybe not out through its hands, but something contained within it, like its chest or its head, is a fluid that is like, I'm thinking hugely enzymatic rather than being acidic.
Okay.
And that what you are doing is essentially letting some of its digestive juices out.
Interesting.
The things that break down biological matter.
Yeah.
And this would remove its ability to like burn through steel, but it's the kind of thing where if a little bit gets on you and hits your bare flesh, it starts eating into the flesh and leaving any kind of inorganic material behind. Like it just eats through exclusively organic material. I think that could be very scary, and it makes a lot more sense from a biological perspective.
Yeah. I also like the idea that if like there's maybe like some like alien bacteria or something in that.
Oh, yeah.
That reacts badly with humans or whatever its prey is. Oh,
that's cool.
I feel like that could add some additional horror elements to that.
Oh, yeah. Because we've got inside of every human and honestly all creatures on Earth, we've got a whole biome of bacteria and funguses and things that live kind of on us and inside us. I love the idea of whatever it has being very hostile to human life. That's really cool.
Yeah, and that's very on brand with the alien. Of just everything about it is super hostile to life.
That's really cool. Yeah, and so like even just exposure to the air around it might start making you sick.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the closer the contact is, the more quickly you become sick, and the more drastic it is. Like if you're in the same room with it, maybe it just gives you a cold, but if it gets right up into your face or if you touch it, then like it's going to start making you very sick very quickly.
Are we talking about like cancerous tumor growths or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think Absolutely. Like if I'm thinking giving you a like a growth is when it like if it scratches you, if it pierces your skin or it bites you or something like that, but then you get away, then those microbes get into your body and start causing all kinds of wreckage, you know?
Okay, yeah.
So if you go deep into the alien lore, which I'm sad to say I have, because I have to admit, these things get less cool the more you know about them in the lore.
Yeah.
The best version of the alien that will ever exist is in the original Alien movie when you know almost nothing about it and it's all unanswered questions. That's the best version. The more you learn about it, the worse it gets. But one thing I do like is that as part of its reproductive cycle, when it inhabits a host and then comes out of that host, it takes qualities from that host. It uses that as sort of an adaptational method.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. We maybe could explore that idea as well, where by impregnating a host and then consuming it and using its body plan, it's actually adapting itself for the environment that it expects to be in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, that's cool. In fact,
it does make it a really good invasive species.
And I think that it as an invasive species, as something that's going to come in and disrupt an environment, that's where the alien shines. That's where the xenomorph shines.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, if we were going to, I mean, we're taking this idea and making it our own. If we're going to move away from the beautiful H.R. Giger design, incorporating more of the original creature in the resultant design could be really cool as well. Where like,
do you have an example in mind?
I'm thinking like if you can imagine those same sort of black tubes that seem to make up the xenomorph and that head, and then like in areas where it hasn't changed the biology that much, like it has its own head, and so the head looks like a xenomorph head, but it's using basically like most of a human torso. You start seeing human torso bits in there. Like you would see a human stomach and a human chest or breasts and like sections of a human arm in its arm, where it becomes very clear that this thing is alien and it's far away, but it is made from a person. And I think that would be really horrifying to see. And it would make sense for then why it would have that dramatic taking over a host style. In fact,
before we get too far off this, if you don't mind, I kind of want to go back. Like, I like the idea that maybe there's like a basic xenomorph framework, but when it incorporates elements of these other creatures, maybe it doesn't necessarily incorporate them in the same way that we would expect. Like, we always see like the either quadrupedal or bipedal versions of the alien, which are, you know, you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of humanoid. You could get a man in a suit to play that.
Yeah, totally.
Like, what if you've got like, you know, like he's just got this creature's lungs or whatever on its back and just really, like hanging out there. Like it recognizes that it needs them and that it is a crucial element to surviving in this environment, but it doesn't necessarily need to put them where you would expect them.
No, that's really great. Yeah, I like that a lot. In fact, I think that leads directly into where I was about to go, which was this may be a dramatic change, but I want to abandon the chest burster stage.
Okay.
I want to, because it seems weird that it would just leave all of that useful meat behind.
Well, have you seen the original design for the eggs?
Yeah, certainly, but they're not coming to mind at the moment.
Well, basically, the eggs were originally people. Like when they're being cocooned to the walls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like they're just that's where they're putting the face hugger or whatever. They're gestating that out of people. Yeah.
Well, what I'm thinking is in our version of the xenomorph, you would have the face hugger come out of the egg. It would attach itself to a person. And then it's essentially like an embryonic delivery system. Like it is the one that delivers the small xenomorph inside of a person. But then instead of that person being fine for a little while and then having the tiny alien break out of its chest, I'm thinking that the alien just stays in there, and that's the person that it uses to convert itself into an alien, into a xenomorph.
Oh, that's horrifying.
It uses that guy's body. And I love the idea that it doesn't care about, like it has its own ideas about what it wants to do, and it's going to incorporate parts of that human body, but that it doesn't really care which way it does it. And it uses it in its own way.
I also kind of like the idea that like they always show like the face hugger just like falling off and curling up like a spider and dying. Like if that facehugger just stays as part of the process, either as a resource or like it merges or fuses with the host.
Yeah, I love it too. Okay, so we're going to talk about humans. There's going to be, I think one of the things we could say about our version of the Xenomorph is that if it infested a different animal, that it would do something maybe even wildly different than what we're going to talk about with humans.
Okay.
But what I'm thinking is when it inhabits a human and starts reconfiguring them, that one of the things it does is flip which side of the human body is its front and back.
Oh, okay.
So that it like when it bursts out, when it starts having its own limbs come out of the human body, it comes out of what would be our human back. So maybe another set of limbs would come out, and then it stretches that human body out over its back.
Oh.
So that when this thing is fully out and running around, it has most of, if not all of a human still sort of like grafted to its back, which I think is cool.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
And you can imagine
it's got some legs and arms just kind of flopping on its back as it's chasing you down a hallway.
Yeah. Or even
maybe the host isn't fully dead yet, so it's screaming the whole time it's coming after you.
If you want to be very horrifying, you could totally go that way. I kind of like the idea of them fully fully dehumanizing, not fully dehumanizing, but like making it clear that they aren't worried about preserving you. And so the imagery of your face being encroached or being covered up and incorporated into its body is kind of, I think it helps along with that theme. And especially if we're talking about the face hugger staying on and becoming part of the new creature. You could imagine that face hugger, it's now on the back of the creature's head, and you could see it like its legs become frills or spikes or something.
Ugh.
That could be cool. And have maybe in the original version, that tail from the face hugger wraps around the person's neck. But you can imagine that once it no longer needs to hold on, letting go and using that, having this little tail flying out the back of its head, that it can use that little tendril
as some sort of prehensile manipulator. Yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, or even a little weapon. Like that's a thing that can puncture into flesh and stuff. That would be really cool. I personally, as much as I love Aliens and the introduction of the Alien Queen, I think that diminishes the quality of each individual xenomorph. The idea that like they have sort of an order and structure to them, that seems too understandable. Like it's too easy. Like, oh, okay, well, you kill the queen and you're gonna like hamper the colony. I'm like, I think that each one of these is super dangerous in its own right. Like,
sure,
they're not actively hostile to one another, and they will even work together, but they're not part of a society the way that we are, and they don't really care about one another. Like they have these internal drives to reproduce and make more, but that's kind of all they care about. They don't really want to like form because the thing that I remember coming away from Aliens with was the idea that like they're kind of forming a family, and that makes them very human in a way. And I want to I'd like to move them farther away from that and make them more dangerous. Like they don't have any structure to each other, to their groupings. Like they will work together, but each one of these things is its own queen, ready to make more.
Sure. And see, the idea I kind of liked about, whereas you kind of took away like the family element, like I very much got like a hive element, which I think is what they actually call them.
That's true.
But like I definitely got like that kind of insectoid family structure rather than anything human.
Yeah, and maybe that's just different people reacting with their own biases. So sure. maybe my takeaway is not the same as everyone else, which is totally cool.
But I just like the idea of each one a very significant threat on its own.
Yeah. One thing this could be cool is instead of laying eggs the way that we think of creatures laying eggs, or maybe I guess they kind of construct the eggs in their version of it, where they take a human and they'll make them into one. Mm-hmm. What if as they're growing, like they just grow face huggers as like parts of themselves that drop off and become then run off and do their own thing.
I like it.
And that if you ever encounter them in the egg, that's when a face hugger like can't find a host, and so it sort of it cocoons up and waits for something to come along.
Yeah, it goes dormant, kind of.
Yeah, that's its hibernation. But that a fully grown xenomorph is just covered in these, well, not covered, but it's got at least a couple of these things ready to drop off at any moment. And you can see their legs and their little tails.
Oh, I was picturing like, if you ever seen a spider carrying like newborns on its back, something kind of like that.
Well, yeah, 100%. I like that a lot. And that's cool because it gives you a very prominent secondary threat. Like, not only is this creature, the xenomorph itself, very strong and threatening, but it walks around all of the time with these secondary threats ready to drop off. And in and of themselves, each one of these is very dangerous.
Yeah. And I mean, picture this, like you get this dark hallway or something, and then you see this massive hunched figure, and then you see like the lighting flashes, and you can see like just all these writhing shapes on top of it. And there are these face huggers. And in the midst of all that, there's this human face or like human arm sticking up out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really cool. I knew when we started talking about this, that it was going to be gross, and that is not disappointing.
Yeah.
So in the Aliens lore, okay, admittedly, I'm going to caveat people. I have watched the first couple of movies, and then as in my eternal shame, I read tons and tons of the books that they made to capitalize upon the success of those original movies. And then I have not watched any of the later ones. So I know this is contradicted by Prometheus and Alien Covenant and all this stuff that came later. I don't know anything about any of that, which is fine. I don't want to. But in the original extended universe of the Aliens franchise, it was made clear that I think at one point the aliens were constructed specifically as a weapon. Like,
yeah, I think I've heard that before. Yeah,
yeah, that some previous, I think even in the extended universe, I think it was the space jockeys, the engineers who made the aliens as a way to like to control like other species or to as a like an invasive weapon. You could just drop these things as a bioweapon on another planet, and they would go in and take over. And much in our way of like making them less understandable, I think it kind of weakens them a little bit. It implies that they could be controlled, because anything that was created, it's got, at one point it had an off switch built into it. At one point it had a purpose. And I think that having them be an emergent phenomenon, something that came out of just evolution on an alien world, makes them more threatening to me.
Yeah.
Because this is just a better evolved creature than us, and it's not even necessarily intelligent in the same way that we are, but it is better at surviving and it's going to take over. I like that a lot.
I also like the idea that like, see, in our case, like surviving as a species is kind of basically like preserving the status quo. Like if your child is born and it looks like a radical mutant, like something's gone wrong. Yeah. Whereas in the case of the xenomorph, like that's just the next step in its evolution. That's just what's expected.
Yeah, it's just adapting to the next place, to the new environment, for sure. I love the idea of we were talking earlier about the biome of it, that these sort of bacteria that go along with the xenomorph being kind of just as like dangerous. And that got me thinking about, if you get an infestation of these things, like one of them just lands in the jungle and it starts taking over creatures in the jungle, that biome that comes along with it, the microorganisms that live amongst it, if they have similar adaptive properties as the xenomorph does, where not just, this is a macroorganism that takes over and uses the host bodies of other creatures. It might be carrying around lots and lots of little tiny like parasites and bacteria and funguses and things, or the local equivalent of those things, that can have similar sorts of results. Like it could do the same sort of thing to trees and to vines and plants. It could, that these, like just by existing in this environment, it starts to change it into something more like its home by the introduction of these.
Yeah, I like that. Like you could even kind of introduce that H.R. Giger style hive that way. Yeah.
As you get closer to the root of the infestation, you get more and more of the landscape converted over to this xenomorph style, where you start seeing things that to us look like mechanisms and machines rather than biological creatures. And you can look like just under the surface and realize that there are vines and trees and maybe even animals trapped inside of this growing like sprawl, which maybe to us doesn't even look like it's multiple organisms, but if you understood the xenomorph ecology, would actually be lots and lots of different organisms working in tandem with one another. That could be really cool.
I like the idea that like maybe this is like in lieu of like tool usage or something, like this is their method of shaping their environment or furthering their existence somehow.
Yeah, and that they do work in concert with one another, that all of these different organisms are much more symbiotic than you might expect, that all of them sort of handle their one thing, the thing that they do well, and they maybe pass nutrients on to another part of the organism, which then processes them, and then that part of the organism does something else, and like they all work together in a sort of nice cooperative way that's good for them and really bad for us.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that's really cool.
I like the idea that maybe there's almost like a secondary form of xenomorph where it's like like these macro scale creatures like humans or large animals that haven't necessarily been infested by a xenomorph, but they've been infested by the bacteria.
Oh yeah,
and they perform some kind of service to the colony as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you don't get infested by an actual xenomorph, but instead by its ecology, the result has to be wildly different. In fact, it might be wildly different from person to person based on what the colony, as it were, needs. Like if you are infested and converted at a time when it needs more nutrient processing, you just become like a big liver essentially for this whole system where things flow are pumped into you through tubes and processed into something else and then pumped out. And that's the only thing that your body does anymore. Whereas if you were picked up at a time when it needed more,
you need more information about its environment or something.
Yeah. You become a
big sensory organ. Yes.
Yeah. Or maybe you're like it's at a time where it's ready to spread, and so then you become part of it that is just a carrier for lots and lots of these microorganisms that then you have suddenly overcome. Oh,
you become a spore colony.
Yeah, what's that awful fungus that takes over ants?
The cordyceps.
Cordyceps, yes, where it burrows into your brain, takes over your body, and makes you do things, and then you just like run away from run into a new environment and then explode into spores. That's really cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think this is the xenomorph as just a carrier for something that is even kind of worse and weirder is even great. Like I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Where you think it's the big thing that's the real threat, but it turns out that it's this biome that it carries along with it. Maybe that biome is even capable of generating xenomorphs once it gets to a certain stage. Like
maybe this environment or this bacteria is actually the main threat. It generates these xenomorphs as a response to a need.
Yeah, they're more. It's more about them, the xenomorph, as a carrier for this whole ecosystem that comes in and takes over. And when it gets to a point where it realizes it can't spread without them, it just makes facehuggers or makes xenomorphs, like little ones that then run out and go find new places. I love that.
Sort of like an ant colony, like when it creates drones versus soldiers or.
Yep. Yeah. It's responding to a need of its own. I like that.
Mind you, I'm basing my information on how ants work off of playing SimAnt when I was 7.
Hey, you know what? SimAnt tells you that is a perfectly good way to get a basic understanding of how ants work. And there's nothing wrong with SimAnt is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Although now I really want to play Sim Xenomorph.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, I would play that.
That would be really cool. Let's see. What else okay, so what we've designed here, I think we got to give it a weakness. I like us making it more other and stronger and more terrifying, but I think we need to give it something that it has trouble with.
Okay.
That we need a nice, not the glowing weak spot of any video game boss, but something that at least that it has trouble with. Let's see. It can't be.
I like the idea of I like the idea of like something like at least for the bacteria, maybe salt water being like a huge impediment.
Yeah. Although that's pretty good.
Because you can kind of use the xenomorphs as a way of circumventing that by sort of co-opting the population in a more direct manner.
Yeah, where you can't just spread from continent to continent. And then also, if these are creatures,
before we get too far, have we just redesigned the Zerg?
Oh, have we? I guess we kind of have designed the Zerg. Although, in my in my mind, what we've designed here is very much not collective intelligence that has like a mind behind it. I think it's scarier if this is animalistic. This is
just an evolutionary function that has just run wild.
Yeah, this is an instinctual thing that just like it's not. There's no animus. Well, there's animus behind it, but there isn't an ego behind it. There's nothing you could talk to or even really understand. It's so alien that it would be.
Yeah.
It'd be like trying to understand a slime mold. Like you cannot put your brain into the same into that same headspace because it kind of doesn't have a headspace.
Yeah. So there's no need for conquest. It just does it because that's how it exists.
Yeah, that's how any creature would spread. I think saltwater is a pretty good idea. Also, if this thing's not intelligent, it's not building spacecraft anytime soon.
Yeah. And
the idea that it would have come up with some sort of like BS spore colony that it shoots into space or something like that. We're not going there. I think it is trapped on a world or a space station. If it gets there, like it's not traveling through space. Maybe if you just like released a face hugger out into space, maybe the vacuum wouldn't necessarily kill it, but like re-entry would. Like it's not, these things aren't an infection on the global scale unless they've got hosts. Unless you go to the planet and fuck with them, basically, they're not going to spread that way.
Okay.
It's all about, in that case, it makes it your folly if you get infected with them. Like you going to a place that has them is the problem, not that they're just going to come to you in that sense. That's cool.
That's where you introduce Weyland-Yutani.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the themes of the Alien series as a whole is that like anytime really it's always humans screwing this up. Like if anybody ever made the actual smart decision at any particular moment, then this wouldn't have been a problem and nobody would have died. Like going down to the surface and, screwing with the Xenomorphs and then like bringing the guy back. Like, no, this is what quarantine protocols are actually for. Like, and then sending colonists out to the place again. And then, not like, it's like every single decision that makes them more of a problem is always done by a human. They are the lesson of the Aliens franchise is that do not with things that you do not understand. You're going to get people killed, which I think is a reasonable.
Which to live by.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable lesson to take. I like this idea. I mean, I prefaced all this by saying that I love the Aliens or the Xenomorphs as they existed. This isn't necessarily better, but it is an interesting, different take on them in a lot of ways. I think you can pull really cool ideas from this. It's very sci-fi too. Like, I don't think you can pull this into a fantasy setting.
Not so much, no.
Yeah. But it would be fun to throw into a like a sci-fi story or like RPG or something like that. That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Especially, oh man, I would run a game of Dread with this so bad.
Oh God.
I love Dread. Okay. Well, I think we've got some good material unless you've got any other ideas sitting on the table you want to head with.
No, I mean, I think the Aliens were really strong to begin with, but they were also a great vehicle to go in a completely different horrifying route.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What we've done is really just play in the space that was already there, that they already had created. Which is just great. I love it. Well, in that case, I guess we're heading out. Bye.
Till next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. You can find links and show notes at our website, monsterpod.org. Or if you'd like to support us, head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. We can be found on Twitter at monstermpod, or you can email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by Scott Paladin. This episode was hosted by Scott Paladin and Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas produced during this podcast are released under a do what the fuck you want public license.